Thank you very much for your time. My name is Bertram Dorn. I'm Principal Solutions Architect for Security and Compliance for Amazon Web Services in Europe, Middle East, Africa. My training in the morning to speak out my full title, it takes a long time, but it's very important sometimes to exactly point what we are targeted for. So in this case, I have to say, well, you're talking to a paranoid German, and I'm dealing with basically Europe, Middle East, Africa customers in, well, all kind of space. I'm doing this since almost 6 years. In the security role, you can imagine we get a lot of questions. Today, with this 200 level session, I try to pull things a little bit back to some basics and also give you guidance in the future where to look for in the case that you have to prove something. That is a very important topic, and especially with newer and up-and-coming regulations. Sooner or later, a company dealing with data needs to prove that specific things have been met, and this is what the majority of the session is talking about. And the basics I've been talking about, the basics are a little bit helping you to do something which is a very American slang thing, to step back. To step back 2 or 3 steps before you talk about technology, before you talk about products. And that's one of the power of our specialist SAs. We're not tied to products. I'm not there to talk you into something, to leverage products. I'm there, and that's our main mission in the security and compliance space. We're there to help customers make informed decisions. So from an agenda standpoint, a little bit of an overview, and then we look into 2 sets of controls, or let me say even technical organizational measurements. Those are the TOMs. Whenever you hear someone in a security and compliance meeting to talk about the TOM or the TOMs, it's not a lot of cats running around chasing mouses. That's a technical and organizational measurements, which are important from time to time, but we'll look into that a little bit more. So we see generic controls, generic TOMs, and then specific TOMs, which are very interesting, because with the specific technical organizational measurements and specific controls, the customer has the possibility to directly address specific topics. And that's basically the background of today's talk, is if you need to address a specific topic coming from somewhere, there are possibilities for some of those topics to directly get crossed off by using the AWS third-party assurance, which are provided to you. So in the overview space, well, where is this discussion starting? Where are we coming from? Many people, first of all, come with regulation. Regulation sometimes is viewed like, well, it's dropped on us. We don't know why. We have to comply. Let's forward. The background of the majority of the regulations, and this is something I really wanted to talk about sometimes. The background of a regulation is that a regulation helps to protect the society. The regulations are, in the majority of cases, not there to just stress people. The regulations are there to protect the majority of people. Finance regulations are a very important one. Finance regulation makes sure that we get money from the ATMs, and that the balance of our balance sheets is correct, and that it is reproducible. So that's what the regulation is for. It's for us. So regulation is one side, and on the other side, there's a risk assessment from a business standpoint. Security is confidentiality, integrity, availability, and all those 3 areas can affect business, positive and negative. I admit, and especially in the market I work with, there is a lot of concentration on the negative side. I want to concentrate also on the positive side. Security is enabling business. Security is protecting business. We do not do security and compliance because we want to do this. Well, some of us do. It's our passion. But basically, the background is that it is a mission. It's a mission we're on to protect either dollars or businesses or work streams or missions or, well, the society in the regulation. So both of this, the regulation and risk assessment from business standpoint, are coming down to a list of risks. And this is something which is really interesting. If you ask me to do a security review for you, and yes, we do this as SAs, you can call us in, maybe not so much known. I think that most of you have heard about the well-architected review. Yes, fine. Maybe you have done one. The majority of people don't know that you can basically tell your account manager or your solution architect, I want to have a specific security lens on that, or an IAM lens. And then specialists like me or people on the team I work with are coming in and explicitly drill down on security aspects. And if I drill down, I don't want to hurt the lower teeth part. That's really painful. Customers could shout on me on that. It's like in the dentist. This experience we do not want. But to help you with what you do on AWS and what risks you have, we need to have a risk discussion. And of course you will see me sit there and say, well, what are your risks? I can do this pretty nicely and say, well, what keeps you up in the night? But that's more an emotional thing. The risk list should be unemotional. The risk list should not be the list of the fears of the people in the organization. Well, of course, they play into it, but the risk list should be something unemotional discussed, like how do we lose dollars, or euros, or yens, or whatever currency you work with. How do we protect this? How do we protect to be able to scale? How do we protect to be executable? How, back to the ATMs regulation, how do we make sure that the people still can pull money from the ATMs? Having been in the situation to have the button, the no-go button of 90% of the German ATM system, that's something you discuss before you push it. Absolutely. Yeah. Because that could be a run, that could create a run on the banks. A run of the banks would delete physical money from the banks, and they would have a challenge. And sooner or later, people can't buy food. Yeah, so that's a chain. Yeah, the chain, and that's what I want to discuss a little bit here. The chain is above those boxes. The chain is not ending only in our business sometimes. So, oh, that has been loud. Very sorry to the audio guy. So basically, the list of the risks are then morphing into controls. Like I have a risk, and I want to have a control to mitigate or to address the risk. Risks sometimes can't be mitigated. It's okay. Then they need to be accepted. That's a risk acceptance process. Fine. Sometimes people call this also risk-based approach. Fine. It's not that there are no holes in this discussion. It's not that this discussion needs to be perfect. It's important that this discussion is something which is embedded as a process. And if we look back into our first set of generic controls, it needs management awareness. Guess what? Why are we asking all the lists of compliance questions? Do we have management awareness? Yes, of course we have. We can prove that. Not only by telling you that all SAF2s are reviewed by Andy or Steve Schmidt personally, if they are security related. Not only that, we can prove this through other things. So basically, it needs management awareness to drive this process, to come to controls, and then from the control area, we then can work with getting into technical and organizational measurements, the TOMs. Yeah. I should have a cat picture here, but for those who have seen me already in Germany or in Europe, I pretty often make fun about cat picture business versus other businesses. So I didn't do cat pictures here. So technical organizational measurements, and this is basically what we are very good in the tech space, also on the tech people in this conference to discuss them, to be precise, maybe picky, very, very emotional about them, how to do this left or right. Important is step back a little bit, sometimes, not always, sometimes. I had, for example, a question the last day, like, okay, if I switch on a config, it costs me money and it's all this kind of things. And then I said, okay, well, let's step back a little bit. Why do you switch on config? What's your control of that and what's your risk? And once we had this discussion done, we could get forward again and say, okay, well, the same risk which you nowadays address with config, which is a technical organizational measurement, which might hang 15 minutes behind your reality, basically that led to having the same risk be addressed with IAM and preventive controls and even layered controls. IAM on the policy, IAM in service organization policies, and then we figured out double checking that with CloudTrail is leading to the same addressing of the control and the risk as the TOM has been with just switching on config. And that is exactly the interesting discussion. What can we do? And in the end, we came to the conclusion that switching on config for some workloads would be a good thing, because the risk is so high after having done a business assessment from a risk standpoint that there's enough money to switch on config also. And now you have the discussion done. Now you have documented why you do this, and it's not just coming out of the technology-driven discussion. So, next overview step 2. Well, we have the controls. We just discussed how we came to them. We have the TOMs. And that's an interesting one. Why do I do this from right to left and not left to right? And why do I work with customer managed controls and technical organizational measurements first? In the vast majority of cases, it is the AWS customer who is responsible to demonstrate this compliance. There are tiny things you can push down as a customer on the contractual language to AWS. And especially in the finance business, don't know how it's here in the US. In Europe, it's pretty common in the last 20 years that a finance institute is just writing all the requirements into contracts and lets the outsourcing company execute that. Guess what? They lose control, because they never double check whether they have really executed that. If the regulator wakes up and the auditor of the regulator finds that out, that's unpleasant. Yeah, no fun. Now with AWS, and this is one of the main things why I joined AWS, even before we had regions in Frankfurt and things like that, is that AWS and cloud business in general gives customers a possibility to take back control, because we make several things more direct, more easy. So therefore, in general, the majority of the cases are here. The customer needs to prove that, the customer needs to execute it. We have some combined approaches. That's a typical case, for example, well, let's take S3. With S3, we need to make sure S3 has a good physical setup and has logical controls, which give the customer the possibility to set up those controls accordingly to their business. Yeah, and there is no generic thing. I'll give you a typical S3 bucket which is open. You can check it out right like yourself. It's their business. Deutsche Börse is having an S3 bucket where they put all stock data in. Yeah, all the movements of the Deutsche Börse stocks are in this bucket because it's their business to have this public. This is what they want. So of course we give them a control to do that. On the other side, yes, a combined approach would be that not combined control, a combined approach to the TOMs would be okay. Well, AWS is securing the service to a specific layer, and then the customer is configuring the service as he needs. No security talk without shared responsibility, right? So I've done my duty for today. Shared responsibility is exactly here. And last but not least, and this is what I want to give you a little bit of insight, there are 2 or 3, maybe 4 or 5 areas of AWS controls which you directly can harvest, where you have no possibility, as you are not in physical control of the stuff, to take care of it. And if ever there is a situation where we do something which is important for the upper stair controls and you can't prove this yourself, this is a point where we should plant language in our attestations to give you assurance for that. So this is what we talk now. And if you work with certifications, I have here the 4 more, let me say, interesting ones. It's basically the ISO 27000 framework, the SOC Reports. That's a fun thing, by the way, as we have a little bit of time. In the US, I get pretty much the word, well, where is your SOX? And then I need to double check this with the customer. Well, are you talking about SOX, Sarbanes-Oxley Act? Then we are back here. Yeah? It's all customer. Yeah? We have literally no stake in this. But if we talk about SOCs, we have an SOC report. And the point why I put out all those 4 is that all those 4s have reports available. There's a difference between a certification and a report. A certification is basically, well, auditor has seen it, give us a stamp, that's an ISO certificate, 3 pages, fine. But we also have an ISO 27001 report for you, where you get more information about what the auditor has done to come to his conclusion. All those things are available over Artifact. And this is the same for SOC, Service Organization Controls, SOC Reports. The SOC reports are also backwards looking. Yeah, fun thing. Sometimes I get the question, well, your SOC report is outdated. You're not compliant to SOC anymore. That triggers a education situation. By the way, if you cross the Atlantic, don't educate customers. Education, especially in Bavaria, where I come from, is going out of the pub and having a fist discussion. So with my colleague and friend Dave Walker, it's a tall guy, black coat, long hair. We came to the conclusion the better wording here is we inform and entertain, which is, by the way, the BBC motto. So that's working very well all over the world. So as I said, if someone comes with me like your SOC is outdated, and that's a very good information situation. So SOC reports are backwards looking. They say from date A to date B, AWS had those controls in place, and that is a really, really strong attestation. Just imagine someone gives you attestation in the last half year you have not crossed the traffic speed limits. Well, basically in Germany, impossible. But okay, well, if you're a taxi driver or a bus driver or a truck driver, that could be a pretty interesting attestation, right? So that's pretty much on this level. PCI I have here because PCI controls can be very specific. They're not that wide. Yeah, sometimes ISO is a really wide thing. Yeah, you need to have passwords. Okay. PCI tells you which password you should have. And well, that's another discussion. We don't need to dive deep here. How about this? And last but not least, we have C5. C5 is a German control framework. Why is this very important? ISO is done from Ernst & Young in Amsterdam. SOCs are done by Ernst & Young based in San Francisco, if I'm correct. C5 is a sworn-in financial auditor in Germany. Let me say that resonates pretty well. They work a little bit different. Yeah, they come with things, okay, evidence deepness 100%. That's a word, yeah. So if basically we have 4 different view angles, that's my point. We have 4 different view angles of 4 different finance auditors, which are all under regulation. And with C5, and that's why we have the German flag in there, in C5 it's not us approving the auditor. In C5 it's a German federal institute, basically the BSI, which is approving the auditor. So we have less choice. Yeah? Whenever you're in this discussion, of course, you'd come to the point where someone asks me, well, Mr. Dorn, you pay those guys. I don't trust their wording. Well, someone needs to pay them, first of all. They don't do all this work for free. And second of all, with C5, I can say, well, yes, we pay them, but we don't have a choice. There are not so many which are approved by BSI, and if they would lose their BSI attestation or their BSI approval, they wouldn't be in the business anymore for that stuff, and they don't want that. So there's a business enforcement around that, which is pretty interesting. So in the end, come on. In the end, they tell you in several cases that the risk is covered. Physical security, for example. One of the nice wording, environmental risks. Yeah, fire, flooding. With the, I hope that works well, concrete, that's the thing that the buildings are built on, yeah. With the concrete section of our business, as we call them sometimes, power, cooling, concrete, guards. If you talk with them, we dense this down into 2 lines. You can have ages of discussions with those guys. But we dense it down in 2 lines because let our auditor dive deep here. It is an approach to get a little bit independent from technical things. And that is something you'll see from time to time. This is why we do all this discussion. You remember the gray thing, technical organizational measurements. We might do it differently. Yeah, why not? We need to cover the risks. We do not need to do exactly what you do. Or we do not need to do exactly what has been common in the space for the last 20 years. Maybe we find the risk covered in a different way. And I have to say sometimes, well, we will not be in a situation where we are able to tell you how we do this, because that would affect our risk. So instead of telling you how exactly we do this, we tell you through an auditor that the risk is covered. So it's making us independent and also making the customer independent from the technical implementation. Yeah. You can have lots of discussions about cameras, for example, and how to deal with camera feeds and all this kind of stuff. It's more important is the risk which you have and which drives you to attach cameras to your doors twice times from different view angles. Is this covered? So therefore it's a decouple, or it's a making independent situation from technical details. And that exactly is the point why cloud helps you here to scale. If something down there changes, it's very important that we have the possibility to change our technical implementation without telling all customers again. We have millions of customers. It wouldn't scale. So hypothetically, if ever the PCI community decides to change the password rules, we would change them underneath, and besides some reports, we wouldn't tell you. But it's more important that we cover the risk. And we can continue that with several things, in especially in the area of technical implementation. Customer segregation on EC2. We don't tell you exactly how we do this. Well, for those who are interested in, there's a really great talk, the life of a billion packets, or another life of another billion packets, from Eric Brandwein. That gives you a hint. But whenever we change something underneath there, we don't need to tell you, because in the end, it's more important that we cover the risk of unauthorized access. That's the point. So it supports scaling into the future, and it's also a good hint for customers. to look at how we address that, because if you fix your technology implementation in this framework, it makes your, depending on that, it will be very difficult to change it. So therefore, having this risk discussion and the mapping approach is a good one. So we have those internal controls, which I talked of. You remember, let me see, left side here. We have those internal controls. And those are going sooner or later into wording inside our control framework, which is available to you. And this is available over Artifact. For those who don't know Artifact, go to the web console, left top services, go to the security section, you'll find Artifact. If you'll find Artifact, you get a list. Oh yeah, I like this. you get a list of your artifacts, documents which you can purchase, and you always need to also accept the NDA for that. The truth is, if someone is joining our community or team, I make them read that. Not only the artifacts, I make them read the NDA. Sometimes it's not just pushing a button. So whenever you have read our documents, fine. So go to Artifacts, make yourself familiar with the NDA. The reason why we put them under NDA is including, but not only, there might be others. First of all, the language which is printed down in those documents might be under copyright of our auditor. So we need to prove how often we have copied that. And second of all, there are things there which we should know who has them in their hand. Maybe we need to inform you in specific situations. Yeah, so basically we need to have this knowledge. So we can't just spill it out to the wide area. If you have a situation, especially in partner setups with AWS, if you have a partner setup and a partner needs to prove that AWS has some of those things here, there's a SOC report, it's public. That is the tip of the iceberg. Yeah, you can always point to the yeah, fun, right? You can always point to the SOC 3 and at least tell, well, Ernst & Young has done their work and they give AWS in general an attestation or third-party assurance that, for example, we are protected against unauthorized access modification use. So that's important. And, well, that's an important point. Human review. No AI, no machine learning. Don't tell AWS, can you do this for us? Why? This is the point where the customer needs to take care of his obligation of executive care. Yeah, if you buy a car and tell your partner, well, I bought the car, but I just relied on the used car salesman's words. I've never checked the car, and the car is breaking. Well, guess what? You get a hard time, right? Let's scale this to a regulated finance institute. Yeah, AWS has said that everything is fine, and something happens, and we say hypothetically, well, it's not inside our report, so it's not covered risk. You should have done this yourself. So basically, that does mean, please take the time and review that. If you have challenges, if you print out all those things here, I would say 1,200 pages. It's too much. I totally agree. Call in an AWS specialist like me and the team. We help you dive deep in this. We show you the areas which you should work around. We show you how this is structured. Some of the reports have a section, AWS is great, 30 pages. Then auditor is great, 25 pages. Page 58 is starting with the corresponding controls. Yeah. Don't want to say that there is no valuable information there. It's a printed thing which is signed by the auditor. Yeah. But It's a question whether you're on a plane and need to sleep. Good. You might digest some of that. It's good to know the wording. You know, this is public AWS wording, which we agreed on with the auditor. It is strong. But for a review in, let me say, 8 hours of business time of those things, I give you a better way. I give you a more direct way, and I want to guide you a little bit in how this is structured. So the artifact is going into those documents, and those documents have a mapping table. A mapping table looks like that. CC, that's common criteria. So if you have a common criteria, control or risk, you see a mapping table to the AWS CA, that's the AWS control criteria, and a list of AWS CAs which map into this common criteria control. And this pattern is repeated. In SOC 1, you only see this side. In SOC 2, you might see a table like this because SOC 2 is common criteria based. In PCI, you see PCI controls. In C5, you see C5 controls, but they all map into AWS CA. So maybe it's a good idea to read the AWS CAs first to know the scope. Now we are talking AWS CAs. When I've done the presentation some weeks before, had a count of 91. So Excel file with 91 lines. I think that is something where I'm not unreasonable with human interaction. If you're a finance regulated institute and you don't take the time to read those 91 lines, your auditor and your regulator will give you a hard time. And maybe it's a really good idea to do it old school style, print it out and make your signature. This is the version I've read. And make a check mark, read, and put this somewhere, because it's an outstanding exercise. If you have a finance regulator auditor in the room, the first thing you give them, this is what I have reviewed about my outsourcing party. Physically. They will love you. That reduces the stress. That creates a really good atmosphere. That gives them the idea you take obligation of your executive care pretty well, instead of, yeah, we know there are some reports from AWS, but under the table they tell you, well, we have never read it. So that is something we try to avoid by going through this 91 lines. And I will concentrate approximately 15 minutes before I close the session to give you a little insights what to search for here. So that's the control mapping. And what can we search for? Controls for the organization. As I said, awareness of management and awareness inside the organization of risks, enabling the people to know about the risks, enabling the people with training about data protection, about risk management, about what they should do. That's a very important part. So therefore the risks are cultural risks. Does the company has a culture of security? If you just say, yeah, AWS is great and big, that's not an attestation that we have a culture. So it's better if you say, well, Ernst Young thinks 4 times in a row that they have culture. And it's the same with unmanaged structures and processes. Do we have processes to manage this? Are the documents reviewed regularly? Are the people enabled? As I said, training. Screened. Are the people screened? That's a typical US question, by the way. In Europe, and especially in the EU, screening of employees is a really difficult thing. Yeah, because everything I can tell, I'm legally need to give them as a typical employee as my copy of my police report, which is basically an empty page with a header, hopefully. But that's exactly what they watch out for. Yeah. So screening, all this is there, and you don't need to make photos of that. We publish the slides. Don't worry. That's a sample. So I would watch out for those AWS CAs. And as we make this video public, I will not print them here. Because I told you already, though the text is under NDA. So look at those CAs, and will help you a little bit with management awareness, board observation, policies, reviews of those policies, training. So whenever you have someone, okay, are the AWS employees trained to the corresponding necessary level to fulfill their job? That's the right question. Then one of those CAs will help you. And you see already they are grouped. Yeah, they are grouped. So just jump into this group of CAs and search for these topics. It will be a pretty quick exercise, and then you can cross it off. So, physical risks. We love them. Concrete fraction. Basically, risk is unauthorized access. Risk is environmental risk. Fire, water, cooling, power. You can have nice discussions how to distribute power. Interesting. I had one customer who was asking me, well, how deep are you burying your diesel? Because they had the technical control that their diesel must be under earth. It's not allowed to be on top of earth because they had a burn down of the diesel tanks. And they have been so scared that they say, okay, we never, never, never work with someone who's not burying his diesel. You see what kind of discussion you suddenly have. You can that delays an engagement process by 2 weeks because we need to inform the customer how we approach that and that his risk is met. Yeah, his risk is not the diesel. Yeah, his risk is that he has no power, and we have enough controls and language in those CAs here to prove, well, we address this risk. We will not tell you how. It's not necessary. Yeah. Another thing, but that's pre-AWS. I had someone asking me, how much torque do you use to mount the screws in your data center racks? You might think that's funny. Who is from Japan? No? Okay. Well, in Japan, it's a really interesting thing. You should do this because if the earth is shaking, you don't want the screws to fall off. So basically, you have a regulation because it's regulation people. It's important for the people there that the screws of the data center are mounted the right way. And it's understandable. Well, we would say, well, go back to the risk. What's your risk? Nowadays, we have the Osaka region and we have other regions around and say, okay, let's get off region. Yeah, let's copy this off. We can't help you with this TOM, yeah, technical organizational measurements, but we can step back to the risk and address it. Yeah, and whenever an SA tells you, well, we work with you to architect it correctly. This is their AWS mind. Yeah, this is what we tell you in all the trainings. That is what we pump into the culture. But in the end, what we mean from a security standpoint, therefore we have security specialists, we say, okay, we will help you addressing your risk by morphing your technical organizational measurements in something which we can provide. And that is exactly the thing. So basically, if you go through this CAs, you address things like physical access, cameras, intrusion detection systems, you call it, yeah, power, cooling, and protection from elementary risks, which can be a huge thing, yeah. And again, maybe we don't tell you exactly which risks those are, but this is exactly where a customer needs to go back. I will not fly back to the people thing, but this is where you need to make your own assessment. I cannot give a customer a language like, yes, it's okay for you. In this case, if we talk about regulation, I would give legal advice. And we are not giving legal advice. We can say, this is what we do, this is what we can help you with TOMs. If or not that does fit to the customer's needs is something the customer need to find out himself, therefore human review. If you ask us and someone is giving you an answer, well, maybe tell me or some of the team, because it is a little bit difficult as a service provider to give this kind of guidance, and especially if there's no contractual language for it. So physical stuff. Logical controls, basically logical controls are against unauthorized risk. Traceability, PCI is a really nice thing here. Tells you, okay, as we are PCI compliant, we must have corresponding log files for all people, what they have done, when, who, and this is not changeable, and it must have a good timestamp. This is PCI, so whenever you have traceability challenges, you need to prove that we do the things right. PCI helps you. It's the same with changes. If someone is in the area of food and drug manufacturer, you might have not an auditor, they call themselves an inspector. FDA inspector wants inexplicitly know how changes are done, because changes to the systems might affect changes on the food chain. Again, we're pretty deep down in what we do and what we eat. So yes, changes are important. Do we have tracking of changes? Do we have controls? Are we proving that changes are reversible? Things like that. This is checked by our auditor. And there is one line or two lines in those CAs here, which give you assurance that we do things on our side of the shared responsibility to support those things on our side. And basically, change management is a pretty important one. Logical access, a nice wording, by the way, tells you pretty good what we do and what we not do and how we do it a little bit. And then make your assessment. Does it fit to and don't make an assessment, is it the same you have done? Make an assessment, does this fit to your risk? Because we might do things differently. And logging, of course. Logging is a very good one. That's a typical approach. We'll not share the log files with you from underneath of the shared responsibility, but we can prove that they're there. This is what we need. And tell you that it's coming up in more than 50% of the engagement process in Europe. Well, how about log files? Can you share them? Well, why should we share them? The information there might not be usable for someone. It might contain other customer data. No. But we can prove that we have them, and that's the important part. That is mitigating the risk. A really nice one, I love it, is data delete. Data delete is something where you send us a machine-readable command, API call, and you have no idea whether the data is really gone or not. You can't prove this. Not with the old methodology. So this is a very, very good example where we have to take specific controls, not generic like, yeah, we are protected against environmental risks. Those two controls here, they tell you, if you have sent us an API call for deleting the data is rendered unreadable. And the second thing is telling you, well, we destroy the devices at the end of the lifetime. You for sure have heard already all these things about crushing disk to dust, things like that. That's the physical implementation, which we don't need to talk about. We need to talk about, well, if you have sent us a delete command, we executed it. And that's, especially with some data protection regulation, that's so strong that the customer cannot rely anymore on our documentation. And he can't rely on marketing people. And he can't rely on people from the managed service provider. He needs to rely either on things he can touch himself, or on a trusted party like Ernst & Young, sworn-in finance auditor, under pressure with all I said. And then he can point to this language and say, well, we can prove through CloudTrail that we have sent the delete command to the volume. Ernst & Young is giving attestation that if this thing is run, the data is rendered unreadable, and at the end of a life cycle, because we know the volume might sit on several disks, and we might swap in and swap out disks while the volume is running. At the end of the life cycle, devices are destroyed. And that creates a complete evidence chain so that a customer of AWS can use those services to prove that he can delete data. Of course, we can now dive deep into what happens with databases and backups and all those things. But sooner or later, it's dancing down for some of those services, it's dancing down to Elastic Block Store in S3. And therefore, you get this. It's a little bit a challenge if the service is not dancing down to EBS and S3. And that is a typical case where I need to give guidance in the way of, well, this is what we have. And sometimes the customer might choose not to do something. And the nice part of the job is, well, I'm rather happy he's choosing a decision not to do things if he's not happy with the risk. Then I tell him something and he's doing it and later finds out, in a worst case, through his auditor or through his regulation auditor, that things are not as he expected. This is an unpleasant situation, I can tell you. So better I have this talk here and dive deep on some of the background stuff to find out what's there. So those two are very important: data delete, specific control. And multi-tenancy, that's more or less one of the crown jewels of cloud business. Risk is unauthorized access, instance A, VPC A, customer A gets somehow access to instance B, customer B, VPC B, business of AWS going down. So it must not happen. And it's very important that we can prove we have addressed that risk. That also does mean, for those in the room who work for partners in the SaaS business, if you can prove, if you organize your SaaS service to depend on the controls we deliver, for example, if you harvest the EC2 or inherit the EC2 tenant segregation, you have solved your problem. That might not scale. Yeah, I see people nodding, yeah, that might not scale, but it might not scale also from the money standpoint. But on the other side, it gives attestation, it gives assurance, and in the situation of an audit, you exactly can point which customers on which EC2 instance as a SaaS provider, as we also can. So it's dancing down to that point, and I strongly recommend to take the wording which we have and try to make use of it, because this wording is more or less free of charge. It's something we provide to maintain our business, and the customer can use the same thing to provide his business. So that are the corresponding controls, and they in the end lead into the risk of unauthorized access. We have this wording for VPC, we have the wording for EC2, we have it for EBS, and we have it for EC2. We have it for S3. So there we say, well, customer B can only access customer A's resources, if customer A or potentially both have agreed on it. It's not that it is not possible, it's just said that there needs to be an agreement on it. And this is how you can harvest our infrastructure from a compliance standpoint to address your risks on your side, multi-tenancy and the other parts, so that it is scalable. So now we are back in cloud business because this is everything available to you today. And also, little side information, why don't we give you a roadmap on compliance? Because if I would give you something which we hypothetically could give an auditor in the future to review, that doesn't make you secure today. It's not helping you today. And we have no idea what the outcome is. Well, of course, we do the best to have the outcome positive for us. But without an attestation of the auditor on paper, signed, those 4 things I showed you, they have the signature. Sometimes you get a PDF with an embedded image of the complete document, because that's the evidence level. You have the signature of Ernst & Young. And as long as we don't have the signature of Ernst & Young, there's no need to talk about hypothetical controls or hypothetical evidence with customers. Besides, and that's something where we open, well, tell us what you would like to see, and we'll find out whether this is something we can put into as a product feature request, a PFR to the compliance team. And last, I still have some minutes left, KMS, key management. That's a really interesting one because the cryptographic world is a little bit more paranoid. Yeah, that's what I'm coming from. So it's, again, risk is unauthorized access, for example, not inclusively also. We have some AWS or KMS specific controls, and they talk about key generation, who's using the keys, key management, key changes, which service. That is a really important one. If we tell you, well, yes, if you have checkmarked the API call to, or you have checkmarked the button in the console, or you have set the corresponding parameter in the API call, and API call is turning back and you think the volume is encrypted. What's your proof that the volume is really encrypted? That this is not just a fake thing? In the old time, I would just pull the disk and take and read it. And if I can't read it, I take a laser interferometer and read it like that. I would try to mount it. I would do something. All this is in the cloud world not working. So therefore, we must give you a way, besides our documentation and the word of an employee, that the disk is encrypted. And this is exactly what the controls here say. If the auditor is checking whether these systems are really doing encryption, and then it's not an AWS wording anymore, it's Ernst & Young from 4 angles. It's a very good thing. Last but not least, there is a control that KMS is logging into CloudTrail. I love it. I leave it to you what this does mean. But for CloudTrail, for those who have not heard this, CloudTrail, besides KMS, is a best effort approach. And whenever you have an SA telling you all API events are going into CloudTrail, he is technically not precise. Not all services are going into CloudTrail. The vast majority too, but not all. With KMS, that's an important part. This is not longer documentation. This is not longer AWS wording. This is proven by Ernst & Young. And it's not mandatory anymore. We can't opt out. We must keep this online. And if we would switch this off, our auditor would find and tell you, at least in the next SOC cycle. So make up yourself in mind what this does mean for you, and especially in the crypto space. And from there on, as I said, I will end up approximately 5 minutes before the end. That's exactly the point. 5 minutes, 37 seconds. I really like it. Next time I know that you have headphones, I bring my keyboards, or better, my piano. On the AWS Summit for Berlin, I've been playing piano for 4,500 people on the stage. So we're not doing things like that. We are also doing other things. I thank you for your time. I thank you for your participation, even over eye contact. I like it. The format is very well. I'll be hanging around here or at the booth if you have some more questions. And thank you very much for your attention. Don't forget to give us some review. Enjoy the time here. And yeah, maybe see you later. Thank you.